everything can be broken down to a neuronal process in the brain, you know, and it's the studies that have come out through like imaging studies showing the brain and like the right areas, and essentially, you know, the way we're kind of taught to see how things are working is it causes an effect. Yeah. So block it to see if that also stops the effect. So we've done that with psilocybin. We know it's acting on serotonin receptors in the brain, the 2A specifically, which is in like the higher cortical regions. Yeah. And then if we block that one, it stops the psychedelic effect happening.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Mushroom Podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Julia Joyce. And Julia is the research director for the nonprofit organization TheraPsil. TheraPsil meaning therapeutic psilocybin. And they are a coalition that is dedicated to helping Canadians in medical need access legal psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy to treat end-of-life distress. So it is Julia's job there to collect the data from these therapeutic sessions and then present that to the government to help other patients in need of accessing psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. Julia also has her master's in neuroscience from the University of Bristol in the UK. So we get into some really fun, interesting conversations around what happens in the brain when we ingest psilocybin. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this chat with Julia Joyce. Julia Joyce.
Yes.
Joyce, did I say that right?
Joyce, yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah. Nailed it. So Julia, thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we've had a lot of excitement around you being on the podcast.
Okay.
A master's in neuroscience and currently the research director at TheraPsil.
Correct. Yes. Amazing. Yeah, nailed it.
Yeah, so what does the research director at TheraPsil do?
Great question.
You're just talking about having many hats, so I know there's probably a lot of things you do in a new
I'm actually going
to
back it up a little bit further, just kind of where I started with TheraPsil. And I actually started very August of last year when TheraPsil was still very small, and I was actually doing patient intake role. So I was essentially doing Natasha's job, who you had on recently.
Right, yeah.
Designing patient processes, interviewing the patients, helping them with their Section 56 application in order to get a legal exemption, and then kind of supporting them and connecting them with therapists, which for me, I feel like I love telling that side of where I kind of, the roots of where I started with TheraPsil, because as a researcher, I think it's such a privilege that I was able to kind of connect with the patients on that face-to-face level. And it really hones in on like why this work is so important that we're doing. And I'm directly connected with the patients that I'm helping through the research. Whereas I feel like in so many other industries where research is involved, you're so disconnected from the cause that you're trying to help. For example, like, you know, if you're looking at like cells in the brain to do with like Alzheimer's disease, how many people in that lab are actually working with a human with Alzheimer's? Right. So for me, that was really important. But yeah, when we started to expand and TheraPsil kind of needed capacity and we got amazing Natasha on to kind of take over the intake role, I transitioned into research. So essentially that means a lot of things, but I am setting up or basically coordinating all of the research that goes on. So observing the TheraPsil program, working with national and international universities to get that going. I've done public perception polls as well. So I did a big poll earlier in the summer to understand what Canada's perception were to changing like regulations.
Where are we at right now?
It was good. So we basically, it was really encouraging. So we basically asked two questions in that poll. They're pretty much the same, one without education, one with. The first one being like, what is your opinion on changing psilocybin regulations to allow it to become medically available for patients who have their doctor support? Yeah. And that was like, it was a majority. I think it was around 55%, 54%. And then we just provided a little bit of education on the second one, being like, here's some research. There's currently 38 patients who've been given an exemption. You know, so many are still waiting. Research has shown this so far. What's your opinion? And that rose to 66%. So 2/3 of the Canadian population. Yeah.
Just and it was a little bit of education.
Yeah, absolutely. Which
12%
is
12% jump.
Oh my
That's
gosh,
awesome.
That was like amazing to see, because it was like, it really makes it clear that we need to do more education and kind of address the stigmas and misconceptions that are currently existing around psychedelics. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so it was really promising.
Even just seeing that we started with 54 before that little bit of education, that's pretty encouraging.
Still
to be in a majority vote before we even kind of tell people, you know. And maybe that just means that a lot of these studies have been getting out there.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people that have been, you know, reading Michael Pollan stuff.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
How Do You Change Your Mind is just a brilliant history of everything to do with psychedelics. And,
exactly. Yeah.
Apparently, it's going to be a Netflix documentary coming up, so that's going to be
amazing.
Yeah, like a 4-part docuseries.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited for that, for my own viewing pleasure.
Me too. That's great. Yeah.
But also just to really give it like more of a you know, more mainstream platform, aside from just like this specific audiobook or that book to go and read and spend those, you know, 20 hours to read that book. That'll really get that word out there a lot more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So your work before TheraPsil, what were you doing before?
So I basically spent, when I was in the UK, I was doing Alzheimer's disease research as well. I was working in Belgium, and then I kind of moved to Canada after I finished my master's as a kind of break, as a sort of interlude to be like, do I want to do a PhD? I got offered a couple through my master's.
Go and find yourself.
Yeah, I went to go find myself in the mountains. And then somehow ended up staying. But I wasn't really doing that much to do with neuroscience at the time, just kind of figuring things out. I was working for the Adaptive program, working with people with cognitive and physical disabilities at the time, and kind of finding my niche. And then I actually ended up coming to Victoria to work for University of Victoria in the concussion lab. So really interested in seeing the brain under different states when it's injured and that kind of recovery process. And then I was essentially moved to Victoria on a whim post-pandemic, and ended up falling into the role at TheraPsil, which is I feel like it's something that I kind of maybe manifested because I really wanted to be working with people. I didn't want to be sat in a lab, essentially. Right. I consider myself more of like a creative scientist. Like I really want to be working with people every day. I need to be stimulated. I need to have some sort of creative outlet and that sort of side. But also, like, I love the science of the brain. Like, I love understanding kind of its processes and why things happen and like different states of consciousness. And then, the role at TheraPsil kind of came up, and the rest is history, I guess. Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear the perspective of working in your previous industry, of like working in the lab, but working on Alzheimer's, but not working with people. That's a very strange disconnect.
I found it, and I mean, I had done some experience of working and understanding Alzheimer's, but it's, you know, it is I'm not going to disconnect, like, they are doing incredible work in these labs, and, you know, like really doing a lot of drug development and things that are really helping to prevent. But you do just, I've personally felt that disconnect between like the cause that I'm trying to help, and you don't necessarily get the same voice, or, you know, that I knew I could have in a role such as like I have right now, to be able to advocate for people and advocate for a cause, and it actually be a passion project rather than a 9-to-5 kind of a job, you know. Whereas I really feel like the role I'm in right now with TheraPsil is a passion project. It's I'm thinking about it constantly, and I love it and love learning more and interacting with other people and sort of spreading that awareness. So
that's huge when you can say that your job is your passion project. You get paid for your passion project.
Absolutely. I know. I feel like I pinch myself every day.
The
it's
dream.
Great. Yeah.
Living it. That's so cool. So what are you seeing right now through some of the research that's going on within TheraPsil? What's the latest?
So I guess we've kind of done things very unconventionally and a little bit backwards, but not meaning that in a negative sense, as in, like, typically a drug, to get it through to, you know, everyday use and get its DIN number and whatever it needs to go through clinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's on the market, and it requires like the pharmacokinetics and dynamics that it's within that population, and sometimes it still gets withdrawn then. Whereas we have, through these Section 56 exemptions, which are giving people this legal exemption to possess and consume psilocybin, it's like it's a post phase 4 trial in a way, because it's this is happening within a community. So we've partnered with Imperial College London, who have basically been the pioneers of psychedelic research, and they have a huge centre there, and led by Robin Carhart-Harris, who's now moved over, and David Nutt also founded that. So there's some big names sort of coming from that, and they have this platform called Psychedelic Surveys, which allows like quantitative, naturalistic perspective data to be collected on psychedelics. So they have a ton of surveys, some of them for like microdosing, for like DMT, for LSD, for like ceremonials, so people can just like log in anonymously and handle these surveys, and they're able to kind of pick up all of this data, which is a huge wealth of data. So through that platform, we've designed a unique like quantitative survey, which has just been approved. So patients who want to participate can have the option of doing that. Cool. And then on a Canada side, we're working with Northern Ontario School of Medicine and also McGill University, and designing qualitative studies as well. So this is more kind of interview style questions of like the patient, the caregiver, and just asking things like what was the process of you getting your section 56? Like where did you find your mushrooms? Like how did you find your mushrooms? Like what was that experience like? What strain did you get? How did you consume them? All this like detail that no one really knows about. So so we're hoping then with like collecting all of this data, even though like it's already happening live in life now, that we'll be able to use this to maybe inform like policy changes and just understand actually what's happening, because like visually we're like, it's great, it's amazing, like patients are telling us they've had the best experience and patients are moving through, but without any sort of figures and values and numbers, it's all just kind of and it's not meaningless, but it needs to have some sort of value with it as well. You gotta
collect the information, organize it, and then present it.
For sure. Which is kind of where I come in that sense, to kind of organize all of that. So
we all know people who are in this world of psychedelics and psychedelic therapy. We all know what's going on. We talk to friends about it every day, and they're like, "Oh my god, it was incredible." But you really do need how do you distill that down? So that was actually a good question. Is how do you take some of these mystic experiences that people have had that are very difficult to put into words and present that information and distill it down? Like, how does that?
So there's so many validated scales that are out there, and all kind of designed for different kind of populations of people. So just off the top of my head, there's the like mystical experiences questionnaire, which is a validated tool, and you can like measure people's like mystical experiences that they had, and whether it was the most meaningful experience they had or not in their life, and really they can put a value on that. And then there's also like the persisting effects questionnaire, so like how long after. So essentially in this study we're going to be giving people the study as a baseline before they do their psychedelic journey, and then at like set time points after, and you can follow that like later down the line. And the hypothesis being like 6 months down the line, they're still feeling the positive effects from their psychedelic journey. And we're also going to be looking at things like, anxiety ratings, depression ratings, just quality of life. There's, all sorts you can just kind of, that validation you can put a value on. And also looking at the experiences with the music as well during their session, and there's going to be a lot of data.
So amazing. It's exciting.
It's really exciting.
Can't wait to just see it all coming out and read this data and see it actually broken down. I love the fact that there's a mystical experiences questionnaire.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. I know. Yeah, and it's there's so many cool ones as well. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but there's ones about like you have to rate how likely you are to do things like, you look up at the sky and you like start seeing like imagery in the clouds, or like how you're like daydreaming likelihoodness, and that might predict whether you might have a stronger psychedelic experience or able to like open your mind more. Of those people who are like more saying that they are kind of more like the daydreamers types,
Right. Yeah, as opposed to the more like logical, analytical mind, right?
Which could be used as a predictor, like these people who are more like daydreamers and start seeing things, or like more connected with nature, perhaps would be more likely to have a stronger and I don't know, longer lasting experience from their psychedelic experience.
So a lot of these questionnaires are also in the preparation period before people are doing their psychedelic experiences.
Yeah,
and then
for
there's,
sure.
you know,
You can see the after effect as well, for sure.
So it's like trying to create a hypothesis. This group of people could potentially have this type of experience.
Yeah.
How accurate are they?
No idea. We haven't
yet.
collected anything yet, but it's like, I mean, us personally, but there's been so many studies from, you know, like Imperial, Johns Hopkins, NYU that have this data for whatever they've been looking at, you know, like end of life distress, cancer-related anxieties, depression, all sorts. So you can start to maybe see some trends and correlations in the data. And I mean, the more the better, right? The bigger the sample sizes we can get, and the more people sort of enrolled, then the stronger we'll be able to make these inferences about people's experiences. Yeah,
it's just about compiling more and more data, like you said, getting more people involved. There's
Yeah.
plenty of willing participants out there.
Oh, it's amazing. And that's part of people when we're speaking to kind of like our stakeholders and people we're working with, they're like, oh, would people actually want to, you know, they're at the end of their life and they maybe won't want to participate. And it's like, no, like talking to these patients, like the ones that really do want to get involved, it's part of their legacy, you know. They're really, it's like they're leaving something behind, and they're having these incredible, like we just talked about, some of the people's the most memorable and the most profound experience in their life, and they want to be able to spread that word. And I just, it's incredible. I feel like, you know, this quite often in these sort of surveys, like there's a high percentage of like survey dropout because people lose interest or whatever. And I really doubt that's going to happen in this group. I feel like everyone's going to want to be like going through and actually thinking about and unpacking their experience in that way, you know.
Absolutely.
Whether good or bad. It's like, I definitely would. So yeah.
What about so microdosing is a very hot topic these days.
Yes.
I know it's I've been reading a lot about how it's like what has built Silicon Valley, and like a lot of the big ideas and tech companies came out of a lot of people, CEOs there, microdosing. And so now it's the whole movement of these powerful nootropics that we can use to either bring down our daily anxiety, help us get off of some other medications potentially. Just like human performance, people are looking to increase their focus. What are you seeing from the study side of microdosing?
Yeah, so there is a very controversial study that was released this year from Imperial as well, which was a microdosing. It was called a Citizen, I forget the name of it properly, but hopefully we can link it somewhere, but it's Citizen microdosing survey, and they basically found it to be a placebo, which has caused, I feel like, so much controversy and quite a big uproar from the microdoses in this.
It's awesome that you're talking about it.
But I think it's great. I think it's brilliant. Okay, so like you have to go in thinking like this study design was essentially they recruited people who were already microdosing. And then they said, you know, you're going to be involved and you're either going to be given a microdose or a placebo. So they took in everyone's doses and, you know, made everything look the same packaging, and then randomly gave people either placebo or a microdose amount. So you're already recruiting people who are kind of believers in that sense, and people who want to like have that positive effect. And essentially the data showed after that even the people that are given placebo were reporting having like positive experiences, creativity, like just all of the things that we have associated with microdosing.
But everybody in the study had already been microdosing.
Totally. And already, you know, primed and believed. But I think there's the connotations around placebo shouldn't be negative. A placebo can be a really powerful and positive thing. Like, it's incredible. And I agree. I think for a lot of people, hearing the word placebo is like, oh, it's fake, it's not working. I'm like, no, it is. I still believe it is working, because you're almost priming your brain ready to expect a positive experience, and therefore you're already doing the work. Like, you know, with psychedelics, the work begins before, like, the psilocybin's really only a tool to allow you to like go further into yourself and you know, create plasticity and new learning experiences, and, you know, create those ruts and grooves, allow you to think differently in that sense. And you know, if you're priming your brain in that sense and expecting a positive experience, likely you're going to feel like, you know, you have a good day. You know, it's like waking up on the good or the bad side of the bed. So I think, if you're microdosing, carry on. If it's making you feel good and it's making you feel, positive and you're getting positive effects from it, amazing. But also, I don't think people should be in such uproar about it.
Right.
And one thing that kind of confuses me a little bit.
Who is in uproar about it?
I feel just the people that I've spoken to within my circle of like the psychedelic space, because I think they just are so like, no, it's absolutely working. It's psilocybin itself that's causing this change. So and a mixed view. And I think it's a good debate. I feel like it's a great debate, because it's like, well, why is this working? And the other people I will kind of advocate for, as kind of like devil's advocate here, is the cluster headache community. Okay. So I don't know if you're familiar with what cluster headaches are, but just to kind of educate a little bit, they're not like migraines. They're kind of the opposite. They are a neurological condition, also termed suicide headaches because of such a high rate of suicide. So they come on randomly, and people describe it as like a hot ice pick being like pushed through your eye. And unlike migraines, people will rock and writhe. They'll throw their head against a wall. They'll bash it in. Wow. I've spoken to patients who have tried to like scoop that eye out during an experience, and they'll just be like random attacks. And quite often you'll either be like episodic, so people will have them when they're changing of seasons, quite often like the autumn and the spring. Right. But then they can become chronic, in which case they're just constant. And because of that, it's like, these people aren't suicidal, but the pain is so severe that, that's their last resort, is saying. And there's this community and this site called Bob Wold, I think it's the founder of it, called Cluster Busters.
Bob Wold?
Bob Wold, I believe. I could be...
How do you spell that? Just if anybody wants to look it up.
W-O-L-D, Bob Wold, I'm pretty sure. But Cluster Busters is the site, which you'll find. And it's basically a community of cluster headache sufferers who are microdosing and either entering complete remission from their cluster cycles, or, complete decrease in the pain levels so they can malfunction. And it's incredible. It's all, there's like, the literature is very thin. There have been a couple of studies that have come out, but it's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but very strong anecdotal evidence, and like, it's amazing. And these people are, we've spoken to a few of them, and the doses really vary. It's so hard, which is why we can never really like say to people like what they should or shouldn't be taking, because some people will take maybe like 2 doses a year. Some people are taking like 2 or 3 a week. It's like, it's so varied, and people are just kind of, it makes me so angry, like the cluster headache world, because doctors are prescribing everything under the sun, because they'll just try things like injections, occipital injections. People are having surgeries. Lithium is even being prescribed in some cases, which is really extreme. And like, it makes me so angry that, psilocybin for so many people is a viable option, and yet they can't legally access it. It's just insane. But so I'm kind of going back to the microdosing on that loop is, I'm so intrigued to actually understand what's going on in the brain with these people. Because clearly something's working or something's changing. So.
And it's very clear when you're talking about something with cluster headaches, and then you see the results. Everyday people, are we feeling better versus a placebo?
Totally.
That's up for debate, obviously. I would say that yes, microdosing has worked for me in my life. And at the same time, I can see how if someone has maybe taken a placebo, but they're having conversations around what microdosing is, and a lot of the conversation with microdosing is, well, be more mindful, change your diet a little bit. Like there's a lot more, so it's like you're gonna feel better from all of those other things as well. And microdosing is like a part of that. Meditation, you can get there kind of the same place, right? Of just being a little bit more present. So I can see how with placebo, but I mean, at the end of the day, if we're all feeling better,
exactly,
right?
exactly. And you're just putting in so much good work into yourself and good intentions. It's not like there's no magic pill for anything. It's not like you take this and suddenly your life. Everything is work. And I think getting to the journey of wanting to better yourself in some way and using psilocybin microdoses as that key, fine. But for cluster headaches where it's a physical pain, where it's something actually physically happening to these folks, it's that confuses me a little, and I would love someone to do more studies on literature. Call out for anyone doing
there
that.
We go.
But it's
there's one to tackle right there. So how many studies have you read about cluster headaches and psilocybin?
In psilocybin, there's probably less than 5 or so. There's a lot of kind of like data collection, or just like observational sort of data pools in that sense, but not really any kind of clinical studies in that sense. But there has been one that was from Harvard University, which was looking at LSD and psilocybin and cluster headaches, and they had really promising results there. So for sure, look that one up. I just think there needs to be like more funding into looking at these things, and it's only a small population of people that do suffer, but I think it would be really meaningful work and really, really cool to see perhaps what's going on in the brain, and do some brain imaging studies of with and without psilocybin, and see if there's any key differences there.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So the I understand too that I don't know anybody personally that has cluster headaches.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard about them.
Mm-hmm.
You explain them in a way that I haven't heard before. I didn't know people were trying to hit their heads through walls and scoop their eyes out. Sounds pretty extreme and aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great place to start though, because what I've noticed with psychedelics is like they're starting with some very difficult problems, because those are ones that are hard to debate.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's like, if we can help this group of people, even if it's a small group of people,
totally.
With this very like difficult problem, and show how powerful this medicine is.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a conversation in the world of like researching psychedelics? Like, let's start with some really hard problems.
I think it's yes and no. I think, there's been a lot of work gone into end of life and palliative care, and there's been a lot of work into, depression, because there's huge amounts of people suffering from depression. But I mean, in terms of TheraPsil and what we're advocating for, it's been, the first argument we had with palliative patients was with medical assistance in dying in Canada. Right. If you're giving patients the right to die, give them the right to try a mushroom. It's insane. And then we have so many requests, like an overwhelming amount of requests from people with, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, OCD, addictions, PTSD, so many. And we're a small team, we're a non-profit, like knowing how to triage. And actually we started, taking in cluster headache patients because, out of all of these groups, like cluster headaches we see, because it's such a high mortality rate, that we kind of triaged it quite high.
Okay.
But it's just, in terms of what the research is, it's unfortunately financial as well, whatever they can get funding for. And like you say, like not many people have heard about cluster headaches, not many people know, whereas everyone knows what depression is, especially after the past year and the pandemic. It's a huge conversation right now. Mm-hmm. So funding with TheraPsil, how are you guys getting your funding? We are all donation based, so we do fundraisers, which is amazing, philanthropic donations, philanthropic.
You got it.
That word.
Yeah, that's right.
Philanthropists who just want to give us money, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially it's like no strings attached anytime we get a donation. It's just going towards like operating our team and keeping the cogs turning in that sense.
Has that been working fairly well for you guys?
It's been working. And we now, I feel like we've got such a strong team now, like everyone. I just love working with everyone in that sense. Like it feels like a family, so we're kind of keeping aware of the financials in that sense, but keeping an eye if money starts to go down, like let's do another fundraiser. And Dr. Bronner's is a soap company in the States you may have heard of. I
think I've got a little bottle of soap.
Great, awesome, amazing,
from one of my donations.
So they've been working with us since the beginning, and they did that really cool thing. If people donated, they gave them a limited edition, or we'll be giving them. They actually just arrived in the office this week, so you'll get them soon.
Right. Just got out of soap. Good timing.
So it's all kind of just donations, which is amazing, people's generosity in that sense, but hopefully people are starting to see the good work that we're doing and how far we've come in just a year, really. So some big news recently out of the US was that the first study through Johns Hopkins, Matthew Johnson, who did the study in smoking cessation back in 2016 that caught fire, Yeah.
They just got federal funding from the National Institute Drug Association down in the US.
Yes, I sure.
Yeah.
Go with that, yeah.
So I don't know how much it was, but it just happened, I think, on September 20th. So
Wow.
just over a week
Okay.
ago.
Yeah.
The first federal grant that's been given out
Huge.
from the US government.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we seeing from the Canadian government?
It's
a slow crawl.
It's a slow crawl.
They've been busy trying to get more power and
yeah, for
had
sure.
a bit of a strange election recently.
Absolutely, but I mean, at least with this election, we kind of know our roadmap for the next couple of years now.
Yes.
Again, we know
It's
which
good to have it out of the
direction
way.
and who our calls to action are going to, which is good. But yeah, funding is slow. Health Canada really want clinical trials to happen,
Yeah.
which clinical trials I do think does need to happen. I think we need more data. I think we need to understand psychedelics a lot more in detail. Like the war on drugs really was detrimental to any research and really put a pause on things, and we're still kind of recovering from those repercussions. And
Such a waste of money.
Such a waste of money, such a waste of everything, really.
Time, resources.
Exactly. But yeah, so I do think more research needs to happen. There needs to be more funding in place. However, clinical trials would only delay our patients to getting the access they need.
Right.
And I think both can happen at the same time. And I think we've just actually proposed a draft of new regulations in Canada in order for psilocybin to be medically available. And this hopefully, with new regulations would allow research to happen more easily, and patients can get access. Patients can choose to enroll, or patients can choose to, do it in the comfort of their own home. It's I don't think patients, especially, if any patient, should be forced into a clinical setting in order to do their medicine treatment at all.
No.
Like that setting and like what stage their life at, I think is so important in this space.
Yeah, it's funny when you think about like a controlled, sterile setting that from traditional thinking of our the way that we work in like hospice care or a medical setting. It's like you really have to do it in a hospital, right? And it's like to be in a hospital, like the mental stress of being in a hospital, for me personally, and I think most people I know, it's not a very nice place to be.
No, I know.
They're a little bit scary,
just sterile in that sense. And I'm sure that of course there's amazing teams around you, but it's such a personal experience. And again, just speaking anecdotally from the patients that we've treated, like one of the first 4 patients probably had Thomas Hartle.
He was on the podcast.
Yeah,
he's
amazing!
The best.
I mean, he's the best. It made me cry every time I saw him. Like he was there in his family home with his dog on his lap, and he's growing his own, and just like such a good dude. And just his experience of how he described, the music and the different rooms he could exist in and that sort of thing. I really wonder whether he would have had that same experience in a kind of clinical setting. Like maybe not, but knowing that he was completely at ease and willing to kind of go deep into his psyche was probably due to the fact he felt so safe within his own 4 walls. So
yeah, exactly, because there are those scary things. Even though I think Thomas said, when I asked him, I'm like, what was the fear? And he's like, I didn't really feel any fear.
Yeah.
And I was like, right, you've been through quite a lot of fear in the past few years.
Totally.
And I think he had lost that a little bit. But I agree that feeling completely safe and at ease when those big moments come up in a session, whether you're doing psychedelics recreationally or in a therapeutic session, it can help you just like cross that barrier to that unknown, scary place that you might not want to go. Absolutely. But it's all about just like giving up to the experience, and just like going there and allowing yourself to go there.
100%. And this is like the whole kind of importance and really making the awareness of like the setting of your psychedelic experience is so integral and so important. And the preparation, the intentions, going in with the good intentions or going in with an intention for that, and then the integration, right? Like we were just talking about what good practices are you doing to ensure that it's integrated into your life and you're making healthy habits around that. So I feel like the environment is so key that you're in. Otherwise there are risks of having like a bad trip or like a not a nice one in that sense, which can be really scary for a lot of people. And yeah.
Bad trips. You had a bad trip once.
I had a bad trip once. Yeah.
Tell us about it. What happened?
So, I mean, looking back now, like everything I did wrong, it was just with a group of people that I didn't know in a big circle. I hadn't eaten. I was like not really prepared at all for what I was doing going in.
Was there alcohol involved?
There was alcohol involved. There was cannabis involved as well. And I entered into a 6-hour bad trip where it was, the only way I can kind of describe it is like I was aware of my existence, but I had no control over that existence at all. And I was just in doom, everything was just impending doom, and everyone was out to get me, and I could see the eyes within the circle, like all kind of close in on me, and really scary experience. But I came away, and being the background that I did, spent away and researched like, what the hell, where did my brain just take me, what just happened? And I remember reading a phrase saying like most people who experience like a bad journey say it's one of the most profound things that happens as well, that they would almost go back and experience it again. And I completely echo that, like absolutely. I was just like so engaged and so like mesmerized by like what had actually happened. And
what makes you want to go back?
Just to be like, it just entered an area of my brain that I'd never been to. Like, like I was conscious, it was like I was like consciously dreaming in a nightmare, and I couldn't control it. Was a really strange experience, which sounds scary, and it was, but I can't even describe
nightmare.
It. Yeah, like a reality nightmare, exactly. But also being surrounded with some safe people as well. And yeah, I mean, you learn, and luckily for me, it wasn't really that bad. And like I've also had some great experiences as well. But psychedelics, it should kind of come with some warning, and people almost should be a little bit scared in that sense, because actually, things can go wrong for people who are predisposed to certain medical dispositions as well, which is why we screen really carefully for like psychosis and schizophrenia, because there's these like pivotal mental states where you can either enter a place of good and like happiness and you have a wellness, or you can enter into a psychosis, which is you've got to be really careful about there. So I feel for those hero doses and higher journeys, like should be taken with people who kind of know what they're doing, or you should be aware and have those intentions going in, because there is a risk associated with all drugs, with everything that we do,
of course.
So
And is it that you want to have a solid foundation of just like a normal, I'm going to use the word normal, but a healthy operating state, conscious operating state, sober operating state?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think doing some self-reflection, and then like I say, like the set being your inner psyche, like what the intentions are, and your setting being like a place where you feel comfortable and with people that you feel safe with. And if you're doing within a healthcare environment, like you have good rapport with your therapist, and whatever it might be, if you're doing psychedelics as a psychotherapy, that's all built up, and you're kind of not going in blind, which I know for a lot of people are, but at least you have some idea of what the experience might be like, and you let yourself go, allow yourself to go deeper in that sense. And I think that's really important for sure.
So you used the word blind there, just triggered a thought for me.
Okay.
I think I was listening to Rick Doblin from MAPS.
MAPS, yeah.
And he was talking about the challenge of these double-blind studies. And so we spoke about this placebo microdosing and how, that to me that would make sense, because when you're microdosing, it's a sub-perceptual dose. So you're not really feeling it, right? So maybe the placebo, there could be some confusion there of like who's actually on what. But when you get into higher doses, he was saying that like it's really hard to do a proper double-blind study, because the people who get the actual psychedelic at a higher dose, it's very clear to someone who maybe got like a little bit of niacin or something, right?
Absolutely.
You just can't, you can't like distinguish the two.
No, exactly.
One's going to be in an altered state, and the other one, they're not going to be able to.
There's no placebo for a high dose.
That, right?
Absolutely not. No. Yeah. No, it's I don't know what the kind of answer is to things there, but it's you know, we know it's working. We know, I'm so interested in like all the studies that have happened in understanding like the neuronal processes that have happened with psychedelics, to understand like, you know, what is happening. It's not as if I'm going to this like crazy place like doesn't exist in reality and like whatever. It's actually, everything can be broken down to a neuronal process in the brain, you know. And it's the studies that have come out through like imaging studies showing the brain and like the right areas, and essentially, you know, the way we're kind of taught to see how things are working is something causes an effect, so block it to see if that also stops the effect. So we've done that with psilocybin. We know it's acting on serotonin receptors in the brain, the 2A specifically, which is in like the higher cortical regions. And then if we block that one, it stops the psychedelic effect happening. Wow. And then you can also do like radioligand binding.
How do you block it?
With another drug. I forget the name of it. It's called something beginning of K, kinin, something like that. I'll look it up, I don't know. But it will block that receptor, essentially. We know what that is.
Is that what, I think it might be MindMed that's working on that, but with LSD. Okay. They were working on a drug to base, like, so when they're doing these clinical studies and therapeutic sessions with people with LSD, and someone started to go down, you know, that rocky trail of a bad trip, they would quickly administer. It's similar, I guess, to compare it to the opioid crisis. People get administered naloxone and it just like knocks them out, turns off the receptors, blocks it. So I hadn't heard of that, but that sounds super interesting. With LSD, there's more dopamine pathways involved. I'm not quite sure like the pharmacology in that sense, but it's essentially if you block it, you can show that there's not an effect anymore. And then you can also label them, you know, with radioligands, and then show exactly where in the brain they are. But what was I going to say? I had a good point there on blocking and taking people out of a bad trip. So this is kind of where the future, I think, of research is heading. And then people have sort of alluded to looking at the other senses during a trip. So we really only look at like music, right? Like what are people listening to? How can we guide people's journey through music? And for the longest time, it's been the Johns Hopkins playlist that was curated, and everyone has that and just listen to that, which is a beautiful playlist, you know, don't make me wrong. But there's all these kind of other companies, wave paths as well, that are doing amazing things that you can really influence someone's journey through different waves and different tempos and bass and instruments. But they're now also looking into, you know, what about smell? What about taste? What about touch? What about all these other things? And I know in San Francisco they have plans to do this sort of multi-sensory approach where with headsets and like, which seems like crazy tech, like VR but headsets? Actually but you know, you can maybe pick up then like someone's heart rate's going up, or you know, you can see like EEG, like brain signals that someone might have on like an EEG head cup, and see like, okay, like this is all telling us that this person's heading into a bad experience. So let's change the music. Let's like maybe allow them to smell the forest. Let's like allow them to touch this and something tactile, which then brings them back down into kind of a reality, which brings them to their body probably a little bit more.
Which I think could be a really interesting approach to see how we maybe look at the other senses and how they work, but and how we can guide people's journeys. I think there's a lot of things to be looked at there for sure.
Totally. Have you watched any like brain scans of people that are like research that, of like what parts of our brain are fired up in our normal operating everyday state, and then what happens when we take psilocybin?
So I haven't like personally seen, but the main studies that have kind of looked into the different brain regions is they have found the areas, the default mode network is probably the buzzword that you'll hear and people talking about. So this is usually highly active. It's different brain regions. They're kind of like connectivity hubs, and they're like highly evolved in humans, and usually very lit up when we do brain studies, when people are kind of doing introspecting or daydreaming or kind of you know, autobiographical events they're thinking about. So lots of like internal thought processing, and it's thought and now kind of confirmed in some ways that people with like depression or anxiety, OCD, you know, any sort of those kind of indications, the default mode network is very highly active. So it's like that rumination on negative thoughts that is happening. And then with psychedelics, we see a dampening of these brain regions, which therefore allows like other thought processes to happen and top-down processing, which is why we think it's maybe working, and these brain regions are so instrumental into understanding like the networks, essentially.
So the default mode network during a higher dose session gets turned way down, therefore allowing more pathways to form and open up.
Totally.
And then afterwards, how, because like, you know, I think a normal thought process would be, well, after I come out of my trip, isn't my default mode network just going to fire back up again? And then, you know, why do these effects last months, years?
Yeah, so again, it's like putting in that work. So essentially, I think someone used a really good analogy of when we go through a psychedelic journey and you have this like, you know, profound experience, you're entering a state of neuronal plasticity, and you know, you're allowing new networks to form, you're allowing these kind of like higher cortical thought process to happen, and therefore it's like thinking of it like ruts in a river. So like when people are like depressed or you know, have anxiety thoughts, they are in a rut, like they can only think in one pathway and they get stuck in that rumination of those thought processes. So psilocybin, when they go through that hero dose, will start to form a new groove. And it may be small to begin with, you know, maybe just small, but eventually through like good practices over time, like you mentioned, like healthy lifestyles and you know, meditation and things that really help to enforce that rut. So it's not, you know, that initial rut will always exist, but over time you make the rut that promotes positive way of thinking and a new way of thinking stronger and deeper, and therefore, you know,
the water gets diverted from the old rut, right? There's still the same amount of water maybe, but it's not just going back into that one hard carved path. It's being dispersed among these new paths of healthy choices.
I hope that makes sense. I feel like it gets very complex when you start thinking about like the neuronal processes, but I mean, there's so many good videos that I personally love, like the visual representation of things to understand like what is happening, and it really goes to show like that work. And just to speak on like the pivotal mental states as well, there's been a lot of studies that with that default mode network and its activity, and it dampens, there's also this task positive network. So that's
task positive
network, the TPN is usually what it's abbreviated. Which is active when you're engaged in a task. So usually the default mode network and the task positive network are opposite in that sense. So if the default mode network is high in a healthy individual, the task positive network is low, and vice versa. Whereas they often become like dampened and more synchronized when we are like a pivotal mental state, and also people who have schizophrenia and psychosis will have more synchronized activity between their default network and the task positive network, which is why when you get to the higher doses and you start to see the change in activity, if people are predisposed to a psychosis or schizophrenic episode, you may enter a pathology in that sense. So which is kind of like which is why we need to like do a lot of screening before we give people a really high dose, and make sure the setting and is really important in that process, because you want to ensure people are in a place of wellness and not unwell.
Of course.
Always, you know, but
that's where that neuroblocker can come in really handy.
For sure,
that just being developed as well. I'm sure there's tons of funding and research going into that side of things too, right? So this like task positive network, that's the first time I've heard of that. That's very interesting. Is this why I feel good after I've like, you know, and you like have a day where you've got all those tasks and you're just like knocking them out and you're feeling really good about it? Is that because maybe my default mode network is turned down and I'm doing less rumination?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, like, I don't really know in that sense, but it's just an area, again, like different areas of the brain which are like highly active when we're engaged, and therefore if you're engaged in a task, you're present. You're not going to be likely to be thinking about, you know, or autobiographical with or thinking about thinking, you're going to be thinking about the task that you're doing at the
that
time.
Shitty thing that happened in high school that I can't let go of.
Totally.
Probably
yeah,
not everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why it makes sense that they're usually, in competing networks in that sense. But
interesting.
Yeah.
So when we enter a higher dose of psychedelics, I didn't quite understand what you were saying about pivotal states.
Yeah.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
Okay,
because I've heard altered states a lot.
Yeah.
Are you saying altered and pivotal, or?
So pivotal meaning like there's a really great paper that kind of talks about the pivotal mental states, and it's saying that acute stress, so like chronic stress can be a trigger for acute stress, which can then cause a pivotal mental state, and you'll then be at that like branch in the road where either you're going to be entering a place of wellness or unwellness. And then these two network brain regions are really important at sort of understanding that, because we can see the activity in both of these brain regions, but when they reach this kind of synchronous activity, if a person is in a place where they might be stressed in their environment, or they're predisposed to a psychotic episode, for example, then we could enter a state of pathology. Right. Whereas if a person is in a certain setting where they feel like safe and comfortable, it allows therefore then the default mode network to dampen and enter, it allows your brain to access like the higher cortical brain regions in order to kind of have a positive experience. Right. So it's just like showing a good indicator for like the change in the plasticity happening in the brain, and helping us to understand and reduce risk of harm to people. But
so if somebody comes in to work with TheraPsil, and they're going through their preparation questionnaire, is like family history. So if I haven't had any psychotic episodes, but my mother has, does that put me into a risk situation where I might not be able to participate?
It would definitely be flagged. So we essentially, like, we go through our intake, or our clinical team does, and there's all this family history, your own history, like medications that you may have been on, whatever. And if there's any sort of flags or anything like that, it'll be taken to a further, a psychiatric team, whatever, who'll be able to do further assessments to see, because it's not always as black and white as, if your mother had psychosis. But probably that would be a flag to be like, maybe you're not the best candidate to be undergoing this type of therapy,
Until we're a little bit further down the road and we understand that more.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just not quite there yet. Very cool.
Yeah. It's complex, the brain, and
it's amazing. It's so much fun to explore and think about. We already know how complex the human brain is.
Yeah.
And now we're really, maybe that's why this work has taken such a long time to like get out there.
Yeah.
It's like when it was started back in the 50s and 60s, this research was done. Maybe they just got, I've got my theories on why it was had the rug pulled out from underneath.
Yeah. And it's also kind of what's heading in the future is people are trying to maybe look into getting grants for like a transdiagnostic approach and pragmatic research, where kind of similar to like cancers and chemotherapy, for all different types of cancers. Right. So essentially being that they're trying to look into a study maybe where they've just used psychedelic psychotherapy for people with addictions, PTSD, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, as like a blanket rule, like a bucket, and just be like, psychedelic psychotherapy is effective for all of these things, which I think is awesome if we can achieve that. But I think when it comes down to the therapy, it would need to be specifically tailored based on people's experiences. But essentially it's working in the same way, for all of these conditions for people, like the same processes are happening, the same kind of work is required. It's the therapy. Absolutely.
That's doing it. It's like in a conversation with Dave the other day, it's he's been a clinical counselor for 30 years, right? And he's like, I've sat with people and just like pounded against their walls that they have up for 10 years doing traditional clinical therapy. And then one dose of psychedelics and we're in our therapy session and I watch those walls come down. Where like for 10 years, like clearly we've built a relationship. We're comfortable with each other. They're comfortable with me. They trust me, but they can't can't see past
Yeah.
that defense mechanism.
Totally.
Right. So that's what psychedelics can offer people. And so whether you're struggling with PTSD, a nicotine addiction, anything in between that, it's really just about kind of like breaking down like why is that happening, right?
Yeah.
Like getting like punching through that brick wall.
Using that tool for sure, which is why you can understand the frustration of the current drug laws we've got. And it's really, when you like think about it, it's like we're talking about a mushroom, we're talking about something that grows naturally within Canada. It's like
out of cow shit.
Yeah.
Like it's just there.
It's like the government turning around to us and being like, oh, no one's allowed to grow tomatoes or tomatoes. But like it's that ludicrous. And you've probably seen the study as well, I think from like 2014, or looking at harm of different types of drugs and to both the user and society. David Nutt's
Psilocybin's just
so far down, like
yeah.
nothing, and actually has anti-addictive properties.
I was looking at that the other day actually, and like there is, I think I just took a snapshot of it on my phone, and there's 2 scales on it, right? There's like the red section and the blue section. It's like harm to
society and then harm to user, and psilocybin doesn't have any harm to
society. Others is zero.
None. Yeah, exactly.
Is absolute zero. Where you get up to the top around alcohol, heroin, and crack cocaine. Yeah. And the red side is lit up pretty strong. Yeah. Harm to others.
And it's crazy. It's like the language that we're using around different things, right? We're brought up, or like, the French culture, like wine is good, drugs are bad. That's inherent in so many people. And I remember listening to a podcast actually with David Nutt recently, and they were talking about cannabis, and a lot of people's uproar about legalizing, or over in the UK it's like medically available. They're like, what about people who are going to get in the car and drive? And his response was like, who do you think is more likely to get up and drive a car? Like someone who's drank or had a little alcohol, or someone who's like high, or like taking mushrooms, whatever. Like so different the things we're talking about, and yet we don't categorize alcohol at all in the same way.
And it's also just a bit of a ridiculous thought to think that whether something's legal or not is going to stop people from getting behind the wheel of a car, right? It's like, even if you were to make cocaine, heroin legal, like doesn't, like, if people are still using these drugs, like it doesn't matter. It's not like you're saying like, just because this is legal now, go ahead and do a bunch of cocaine and like get behind the wheel of a car. It's like that's not what anybody's saying. So they're kind of ridiculous arguments.
And just the language that we're using around these drugs as well, I think that's key to what we've got to change, and kind of going back to the poll results, and how education really needs to happen in public education, and addressing these stigmas and myths. And I recently went to an event where sort of different research was being proposed, and one of them was just looking at the language that between different countries even, and they were using this tool which they used an example of if you're doing like an online site, there's weird old men pretending to be like 16-year-old girls or 12-year-old girls on there. So they'd validate what like a 12-year-old girl would actually, the language they'd be using in the system. So then if anything was abnormal to that, they'd be flagged, and they could then see, they could do checks like, is this actually a 12-year-old girl, or is it some crazy man behind the computer? And using that in psychedelics, you can see what is the language, like how has that changed between like 2020 to 2021? Like how has it changed between like the 60s? How is it different in more progressive countries to non-progressive countries? Like, and I think that would be really interesting to understand, like, what is the language that people need to hear in order to kind of become more progressive and become more open to this type of medicine? Like, I think we do need to start changing some of the language around things. And people recoil when they hear magic mushrooms, but, use with psilocybin, same as like, you're going on a trip.
Shrooms.
Yeah, shrooms, exactly, which is just, it's just
psilocybin
language.
And shrooms have such a different connotation.
Such different.
When I hear psilocybin, I'm like, well, this person sounds like they might be a doctor.
Oh, 100%.
When I hear shrooms, I'm like, we're going to go sit around and fire and drink a bunch
and
of beers and do some
talking
shrooms.
about the same thing, you know?
Totally.
But like, it's, I think that's key to kind of paving the way to, a change and like helping the Renaissance continue. And
languages.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thing.
Yeah.
Just all of our, the patterns that we built around language, right? And just the way that it like sets off our thought process.
Yeah.
Quickly you see someone get triggered and go down a rabbit hole. Oh, I can't do shrooms.
Yeah.
Shrooms are bad.
Yeah. And so many people have that attitude, and people just think of like hippies in the 60s and just like it's crazy. And
I don't want to be a hippie. It's like, well, you don't have to be.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get your thoughts on this too, from psilocybin itself as a medicine, psychedelic medicine. I know that in a lot of the therapeutic settings that they're doing now in clinical trials, it's actually like the pure form of psilocybin, right? So it's like a white powder that's been extracted, that's in a little capsule. So people they're not taking this scary, because sometimes mushrooms, you look at them and you're like, whoa, that thing looks crazy. And some people don't like mushrooms. Right? And it can be a bit of a nasty taste, or whatever's going on there.
100%.
Do we lose the effects of like the fruiting body and everything that comes along with it there?
No. So essentially psilocybin is broken down in the gut to psilocin anyway, which is what is acting at the serotonin receptor anyway. So no, the effect will still be there. I think personally, I would love to do another poll. So like watch this space to see what people's attitudes and what people's preferences would be because you can have like a raw psilocybin product. You can have extracted botanicals, or you can have completely synthetic form. And we've actually had patients that have experienced nausea with raw mushrooms as well, so they wanted accents to synthetic. Unfortunately requires clinical trials, like the same exemption doesn't apply for synthetic, so it's just wild.
Frustration.
It's really wild. It's such a crazy ad hoc system we've got going on, but it's I would love to see what people's attitudes, because I think the process, like speaking to Thomas, of growing your own is an amazing experience. And I think we shouldn't deny patients, that option of being able to grow and have that holistic process. I think people respect the drugs so much more if they can understand and have the growing process, and, they're more aware of the quantity. But I also think that for a lot of people, they're more familiar with taking a capsule in a pot, and they like to know, like, this is my dose. And everything, and people are so scared always of taking too much, which is fine. And even when they're doing it in a guided session, and we tell people it's like you'd have to consume something like 70 kilograms of raw mushrooms in order for it to have any sort of toxicity within you, which would you would probably die of something else before that you ever managed to get that amount in you, so it's and it does vary between the strains, like the potency and everything, so I can understand people's apprehensions and stuff, but it's I think essentially having choice is the best thing we can really hope for. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's going to be like the naturalists out there too that will just say like, no, you can't just take the psilocybin out. There's something else going on here. There's a spiritual component within the mushroom. Right. And that's going to be up for debate. That's a very spiritual question. I think it's a personal question where people have like a direct connection to plant medicine.
100%. And I mean, they've been used for centuries as sacraments, and it's, I think, paying those respects there and making sure that these people still have the access they need for, ceremonial reasons and rituals, I think is really important that we sort of understand that, and like its indigenous roots as well. But no doubt pharmaceutical companies are moving on, and they're going to do what they're going to do. Exactly. At
the same time, like you said, there's a lot of people that feel a lot more comfortable taking a pill, right? They don't want to take a scary mushroom, right? Because there's a whole different thing going on there. So if they can have an actual doctor or therapist sit there and hand them this nice, neat little capsule that makes them feel comfort and like, oh, this is like a pharmaceutical drug. It's been tested, I know what it is. And that works for them, and that's what it works. I love the idea of growing my own, like going through that 3-week process, 4-week process, growing my own medicine. That whole like preparation. I think that's part of the healing process for a lot of people, right? Because whilst you're doing that, you're probably building on your intentions and what you're,
and they've spoken to some companies as well who are creating like synthetic forms, and apparently like the workers sing during the process. They have like some experience, and it's cool. But I agree. I think the growing process is really powerful as well for a lot of people and part of the journey. And that's my worry is, doctor handing someone a pill.
Right.
Absolutely. But, that education of like this requires more than just you taking the pill.
Yes.
This requires a lot more than that.
Totally.
And you need to have that safe space. You need to know going in and have those intentions and make sure you have the right people set up around you to make sure that you're going to have the best experience from that. So
and
otherwise I'm scared that we could regress,
Totally.
That's a fear
because
as
they're
well.
just giving it to people too quickly without the right preparation and intention.
And education,
But I mean, that's what's awesome. I've talked to TheraPsil a lot, and Dave and Adrian, who's working with you guys, and the process is pretty amazing. It's very slow and intentional.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, let's have a counseling session. Let's talk for a bit.
Yeah.
Let's see why you want to do this.
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of do this for a couple months.
Yeah.
And we'll get there. And like, we're talking about doing but like the work starts now.
Yeah.
Instead of my other experience of being on antidepressants for a bit and going into a doctor's office, and within 15 minutes I had antidepressants in my hand.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's suspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that seemed too easy.
Yeah. And that's how antidepressants work, right? It's like, and I do believe, like,
no, not to shoot them down.
Space.
Yeah, exactly.
They do, but also they work because they, they numb you to the world in that sense, makes everything bearable, in that sense and things. Whereas, like, yes, psychedelics, they're mind altering. Exactly. So it's
needs to be a slow.
There needs to be like that educational process that goes alongside, and I think education and training to our healthcare practitioners as well is really integral, because we still get questions from doctors. Patients right now require a doctor's letter of support for an application,
right?
And they will, with these regulations, probably still require doctor's support. A lot of doctors don't understand or don't know. They're not aware of this. Many come back and say, well, then my patient will be addicted to this. And it's like, oh man, like, how are we here? Like, this is crazy. And, there needs to be that level of care or that connect with, healthcare professionals who sort of do know. And there are a lot of great ones out there, but it's...
We need more too.
We need more. And also, going back to like building that rapport, it's got to be with someone you feel safe, and empower people to have that decision of whether they want to carry on with a certain team or therapists or not. I think is really important. A lot of work needed.
Are there any studies that you've seen in the past couple of years, or since you've been doing this research, that really stand out, aside from like the cluster headaches one? I know that one you spoke very passionately on. Is there anything else you're seeing as just like, wow, we need to get this out there? Because
I mean, the most recent one that's kind of come out that's been plastered everywhere is the Psilocybin against escitalopram study for depression.
It's one that Robin Carhart-Harris.
Yeah. So escitalopram, as you probably know, is an SSRI for depression, and
I believe that's what I was prescribed.
Yeah, it's a really interesting study, and I think it came out at a really key point in time during the pandemic, where actually like mental health has been sort of pushed to the forefront of everyone's minds. And I would implore any of these listeners to read the study and look at the supplementary material and the appendix as well. There's so much amazing data on there. But essentially they found it was a double-blind study with psilocybin and escitalopram, and they found in pretty much every single validated measure that psilocybin was more effective, and for like longer term as well, than escitalopram.
Wow.
Which is incredible. It really is incredible. And that's what I find so amazing about psilocybin, is like one dose can have such long lasting effects, whereas antidepressants, people are having to take them daily in most cases. So and I think again, not to negate like the use or like the strength or the meaningness of antidepressants, because I do believe they do have a place, and a lot of people do benefit from them. But this study highlights the fact that we need other options, and there are other options available to us, and we should be able to access them and get people the help that they need. And
otherwise you're going to end up with too many people on the wrong medicine if there aren't proper options for people to explore, which I think is a huge issue with antidepressants and SSRIs. And speak back to my experience of just like, these were too easy to get, was my thought.
Right.
I'm like, I feel like I should have been through a bit more of a process. And to me, that kind of said like, well, this is like the go-to, right? They're like, oh, you came in here, you're saying you're depressed. Here's a short survey. Okay, yes, like here's your prescription. It's a little bit too like blanket, like let's just
one
bomb
size
these out
fits
to people.
all. Here we are. You're sad. Here's
right.
And
the human brain's too complex for that.
It really is. And I think, you know, some people, you know, I can't really speak for people, but you know, the antidepressants to have that coping mechanism, that's what they want. They want to feel like they can cope with their day and everything else. Whereas I think a lot of people who come in saying they're depressed or, you know, for whatever reasons, want to actually address the issue and like address whatever it is and get kind of deeper into their psyche. And antidepressants don't do that for them, you know. And I think the sooner we can kind of recognize that psilocybin is a really, really powerful tool that we have, then the sooner we can start to help more people, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I read a study recently that was people using them in conjunction, SSRIs and psilocybin. To me, that makes a lot of sense to me, because if you are in a state where you're completely lost, depressed, and you just like can't go to work, you can't function your daily life, you do need something that's going to bring you back to baseline.
Yes.
Right? Because what about going into a psychedelic experience when you're in a deep depression?
Yeah.
Probably not a good idea.
No.
So like merging of the two worlds, it's like, let's get you back to baseline, but understand that we're not going to be working with, you know, citalopram for the rest of your life. That's not the intention. Let's use this to get you to a stability place, and then now let's use something to kind of break through that wall and work on where this depression is really coming from. Yeah. Because citalopram is not going to get you to the root cause of anything. No,
that's so true. And interesting. I haven't really like considered that in that sense, because with most of our patients, you know, there's drug tapering that needs to happen in order for psilocybin to have an effect. Okay. And you know, again, just at the receptor level, there's different things happening. Therefore, you need to allow psilocybin in order to have the effect it needs. So, you know, there's a tapering guide, and you're guided off of that. But I actually am wondering the data of people who go back on to antidepressants if they had been taking them post the journey and are then integrating those experiences, or if the dose is less. Like, I'm just thinking in my head now, we should definitely look into that in terms of the research that we're doing as well, because, you know, we're asking people if they had been on antidepressants or antipsychotics or whatever medications, and whether they had tapered off of them. But I'm really interested if people do, because maybe that is a balance for some people, and maybe actually, like, you're right, once they've kind of addressed maybe what the root trauma is, like maybe they can cope better with life, and actually like the everyday life is more manageable, and they've addressed some issue that they needed to. Right.
At the end of the day, that's what we're all trying to figure out, right?
Totally.
Like, what's the root cause of our problems?
Yeah. And like you say, like, not one size fits all, but it's the brain, everyone's brain is different. Everyone needs a different thing. Yeah. And
everyone's experiences are so unique in the way that they perceived what events happened in their life, and the stories they built upon that. It's not, it's very, very challenging. But that's why it's, I don't know. It's fun and exciting because it is such a curious place to play in.
There's like no roadmap to what we're doing, which makes like the growing pains really hard, but then the success is amazing, you know, and it's like no one really knows what's going on next, but we can all just like hope that everyone's trying to push things in the right direction. But it's an interesting place to play in for sure.
I hope at the very least what this next wave of psychedelic therapy brings to light is that we can almost just like understand as a society and as like a race, or sorry, not a race, but a species, that working on our mental health is just like a good thing that we can all like engage in a lot more, and break down the barriers of the stigma of talking about 100%. Our traumas and our struggles and our suffering, and just like bring it out into the light. Like, did everybody take their shit out of the closet and just like put it out there?
Which I think, as a positive note, generations are getting better at.
I agree. It's coming, and this might be like a little bit of an acceleration.
For sure. Amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Just, I'm sure you experience this as well. Just generational, how different it is. And that was why when I was doing patient intake, it was so heart-wrenching, because you're talking to these like 70, 80-year-old men who are, you know, tearing up, like sobbing down the phone pretty much, you know, who are in such mental distress and end-of-life distress. You're just like, must have been a really hard phone call for you to have got here in the first place, you know, like insane. So I think, you know,
could be the first time they've ever reached out. And like a mental health for a mental health crisis, right?
Totally.
And they're 70 years into their 80 years into their life experience. And it's not really been part of their upbringing or culture to ask for help.
Absolutely.
And now they're like, I need help. Which is it's
huge.
That's what I hope to be shift, you know. 100 years from now, it's like we've all just...
And it's just in school, you know, like I feel like as sooner and earlier we can kind of put it into like it's okay to discuss mental health. I think the better this society
the world's going to be.
Yeah,
no kidding. Well, I'm going to look into some of my other questions from the audience here. I think I've like very sneakily covered a lot of them.
Wow, okay. So we're just going to fire them off at the end.
No. I've been getting them.
Away,
we talked about funding. We talked about the biggest barriers that we're kind of seeing in the world here. This is a good one. So I've heard this term being used recently by, I think it was Matthew Johnson was using this again, the John Hopkins researcher. Use of psychedelics for healthy normals. I just thought healthy normals is a bit of a funny thing. It's like, you know, if I'm someone who doesn't have a diagnosis of PTSD or doesn't have you know, a clinical diagnosis of depression or end-of-life anxiety from a terminal illness, is there any work that you're seeing go into some of these studies of just people who are, you know, functioning in everyday life? Everybody's got their problems. So that's why healthy normals is like, we all have problems, but like we haven't been diagnosed with anything. So
I haven't seen anything. I haven't looked for anything, to be honest, because I'm really interested now, but I would doubt there is because of the funding. Back to the funding again, like, you know, there's
that's
a lot of
not
people
where we're going to go first.
No, but I think it's just as powerful for the healthy normals as it would be for someone with anxiety, depression, whatever else might be. And, you know, to kind of speak to that, I think that there's always more we can do. There's always ways we can better ourselves. There's always, you know, like a different perspective that we can gain. And I think it could just be a powerful tool in that general sense, and just kind of like a different perception on your experiences in your life. And I don't believe in anyone ever being like truly 100% happy. There's always something that you maybe want to address in your day, whether it's like something so minuscule or something from like your past or something that you maybe want to unpack and you know, look through. I feel like that everyone's got a niggle, everyone's carrying their own little pop shit in some way, you know, way, like you so I think absolutely it's just as powerful, I think.
And I think like with that term, everyone, even if you don't consider yourself to have like a clinical diagnosis, there's so much work being done. Everybody talking to a counselor, you know, everybody, but like a lot more people are opening up. Counseling is actually becoming a lot more accessible in Canada, which is amazing to see. And just being able to integrate some microdosing or practices in with that therapy as someone that doesn't have a diagnosis could be extremely powerful, because the sooner that we start doing this work in life while we are feeling healthy could potentially avoid getting into
preventative mechanisms. And that's quite honestly the mechanism for like so many things, right? Like in big pharma, like they never rarely look at cures. It's always like, how can we look at preventions? For sure. So I think you're absolutely right. And just giving yourself those tools, those mental tools, to be readily equipped for, you know, like the traumas and hardships that everyone's going to experience in their lifetime, you know, like on different scales for sure, but we all go through like hard times and traumas, and how we respond and how we react to them is completely different for each person. So if you're giving yourself the tools to be able to respond in a kind of healthy and positive way, and a way that promotes healing and you know, you being kind to yourself, then I think that's an incredible thing.
And I guess the first step is putting the power in the hands of therapists to make this decision for their patients and be like, well, I want to be able to provide my patient with this medicine and try to get out of this route that we're currently on of like our patients, the patients that you guys are working with at TheraPsil have to like go directly and you're helping them submit their letters to Health Canada, right? It's like, just let me work with my therapist. They know what's best for me. We have the relationship.
It should not be an administrative decision. You know, these people do not understand that individual's medical case. They've never met them in their life. It's insane really that it's happening that way, but it's, you know, we are where we are, and actually Canada's pretty progressive compared to a lot of places as well. So hopefully we can just keep moving forwards. Amazing. Let's just quickly see if there's anything else here. These are great. I love them.
Oh, this is a good one, and I think a very important issue, especially just where we're living in Victoria, is how is TheraPsil working with the Indigenous communities here, and how does that kind of play a role into learning about this psychedelic medicine that's been used for centuries, thousands of years?
For sure. So we are definitely not perfect in that sense. Like the psychedelic space is a very white space, and we definitely recognize that in terms of like the modern day psychedelics is psychotherapy. When it comes to our training cohorts, you know, we do make sure our training director Yaz that a third is prioritized for BIPOC and LGBTQ plus minorities as well. But quite honestly, like I was going back to, you know, Indigenous people are really like the knowledge keepers of this medicine. And
that's more kind of what I was pointing to is
100%
like understanding that that's where the real knowledge lies.
Are in that sense. So we are, you know, as I'm sort of helping to kind of draft out these regulations, we're working with our lawyer and also one of our patients who used to work for the First Nations Health Authority. So really hoping that we can work with them to kind of have their input into these regulations to make sure that we're, you know, being respectful for everything that they kind of want and listening to their needs as well. But I also think, you know, Spencer and I have had this discussion where they perhaps don't need / want our health for an exemption, like because they have been using it for centuries, they're going to be carrying on to use it, you know, you know, it's their land, their mushrooms, you know, they've been using it in their sacraments. So actually the Section 56 process so hard to kind of move people forward, but I do think it's important that we create, you know, safe spaces to ensure that if we are training or putting people through training programs that, or taking patients on who are Indigenous, that actually we have access to, you know, safe areas or like Indigenous sort of, you know, doctors or healthcare systems that people kind of feel safe and supported within that as well. Because I think it's all very well and good saying like we want to bring people in, but actually what are we putting into place to make sure these people feel safe and heard within this space as well.
Awesome. That's great. That's all I got.
Okay.
This has been amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to add about how can people get more involved in I'm sure you guys need, you know, there's a lot of people that want to be doing psychedelic therapy, but do you have enough people that are involved on the research side? How can more people get involved and help there?
I mean, I would definitely welcome anyone who wants to sort of get involved and have some sort of insight in terms of like the public education that I'm doing. I would love to kind of put out an animation at some stage. I think, again, going back to the learning, I think visually is an amazing way to learn. I'd love to kind of address those. So would love sort of any input that people have. We're always sort of taking on like volunteers, anyone wants to help in that capacity sort of thing.
Is TheraPsil actively looking for volunteers?
We always kind of like sort of see what our workload is like. Like Adrian is a practicum student right now, but I think he'll be leaving us when like not a practicum student at some point. So again, we'll have to probably look for another one maybe next year. If anyone does, it's julia@therapsil.ca if anyone wants to get involved and help out with any public education. And like I say, another poll I think would be really interesting data to kind of gather. But I would definitely check out any of those research studies, pivotal mental states, understanding probably better, articulate that default mood network and the task positive network as well. It's very well explained with diagrams. So definitely look at that.
We'll find that and we'll link to it on this podcast as well. Well, thank you so much, Julia.
Thank
I've
you for
learned
having
so
me.
much.
Yeah, no, it's
amazing.
been awesome. Thank you for having me.
And just another shout out to TheraPsil and all the amazing work that they're doing. If you guys, if anybody wants to donate, just TheraPsil.ca.
Correct.
That's it.
Yeah.
And you'll see the donate button there, and give them your money because they're doing amazing things, and this work is extremely important. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right.
Awesome.